Barack Obama went to Colombia, but you went to Colombia as well.
The way I got into it was actually through the back door.
Alex, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Thinking about your military experience reminds me of the Vice President of the U.S.
It's chaotic. It seems so organized and stuff, but it's not. I went to St. Joseph.
In Ethiopia. Yeah, right.
It was very tough. They're teaching you so you can fail. It was just that hard. It also led me to get my first job in politics.
Is the future bleak for Africa?
I don't think so. USAID, it's done tremendous work, but it's also tied a lot of African countries' hands. Why do we need to know about the rest of the world kind of thing? So we're here, the rest of the world is here.
Because you're leading it.
So if we really invest just in these 3 areas, then there's no reason why the world would come in. In fact, now would be a great time to do it.
Why did you come back to Ethiopia though? Alex, welcome to the show. It's been really tough to get you on.
Thank you very much. I apologize for being late, but thank you for having me.
All right, you're not late actually. And it's a real pleasure to have you on today because there are a lot of things that we have to talk about given your expertise, your background, and where you're from actually. So let's just start by talking about your childhood in Ethiopia because it is not the whole story.
Wow.
There in the story there is a part where you go to the US and do a lot of things and come back to Ethiopia, but I want to know what your childhood in Ethiopia was like.
My childhood in Ethiopia?
Yeah.
I think it was short, but it was fun. I mean, I grew up, playing just like every kid. The neighborhoods have changed now. I try to go back and visit the neighborhoods, but it's all changed. But it was a pretty uneventful childhood.
What kind of childhood is uneventful?
Uneventful. I used to get in trouble a lot.
Very good.
But nothing major. I think
all right.
Our troubles back in the days were, you're 5 years old and you're not home by 7 p.m. and the whole neighborhood goes out looking for you, that kind of stuff.
All right.
Because we used to play, we used to have sports.
All right.
A lot of kids don't play sports now, or at least play outside. We used to have casts. I've broken my arms, my legs, multiple times. So it was a typical, old school childhood.
So it really reminds me of one point that we've been talking about on the podcast. That's the impact of the internet and social media as a whole, and how bringing up kids now is in back then. And you really you brought up a very important point about being a kid in Ethiopia and experiencing all those things.
It was being a kid everywhere, because when I went to the US, I was also a kid.
All right.
So this was pre-internet. This was pre-social media and stuff. So, people played outside. It's funny. I ran into this lady who runs a sort of a daycare kind of stuff. Right. And what she specializes is in mud playing.
Wow.
And she charges money for this.
Yeah.
And then I told her, we used to get in trouble for playing in the mud, during my time. Yeah. Now we have to pay for our child to play in the mud, So it was simpler times.
Yeah, they don't even have the sense of what a mud is now.
Exactly. There's a research that was done that took these exceptional, people from across the board, from music, from arts, from sports, from, academics, these exceptional people. And they were trying to figure out what made them exceptional. And it was a very long research, maybe 10, 15 years. So they couldn't find anything. Was it income of the families? Was it education? Right. It was nothing. The only common denominator all of them had was they used to play outside.
Wow.
That was it. Because when you do play outside, you're in touch with nature, but you're also figuring things out. You're independent. You're not playing outside necessarily with your parents or with a babysitter or Nobody else is, there's no adult supervision. So you're playing with your peers. So that had so much benefit, apparently.
Yeah. Do you think this generation is in trouble for not having that opportunity to play, to have all the experiences that we had?
I mean, I don't know if it's in trouble. I mean, there's benefits to it. I mean, there are kids now who can dismantle your phone and put it back together, at age 10. So there is some benefits into it. And also the way the world is going, it's more, virtual. It's more technical skills in terms of computers and AI and all that stuff. So there is a trade-off. There's that. But what it does in the early stages in your and there's research, lots of research on this, is it rewires your brain differently when you are exposed to it at a very young age. And that young age is basically, they say some say until 7 years old, some say until 12, 13 years old. So if you minimize that exposure for kids, but then expose them after that, I think the trade-off will be great. Otherwise, you sort of, you've seen it, PTSDs and all these emotional traumas people have.
That's what I was actually referring to.
In my days, the only problems you had was, we break our arm, you have a cast, people sign it, you're great. You can't sign, emotional
Definitely
emotional breakage. There's nowhere to sign that.
All right. So the going part from Ethiopia, and I'm thinking that there are circumstances where you face trouble going there too, because these are two different cultures. And what you experience in Ethiopia, even if you are experiencing these things in the urban areas of Ethiopia, in Addis, in cities, big cities like Addis, when you go to other countries, the experience will not be the same. Not the same language, different culture, different, everything different.
It's definitely culture shock.
Yeah.
I was young enough to kind of not be impacted by it fully. But as you grow older and you move somewhere else, of course, there's a tremendous culture shock.
Yeah.
The language obviously is going to be a problem. But, for me, I was a kid. I kind of, muddled my way through.
All right.
But there's also an identity issue.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's the bigger part. The identity issue is, you want to abandon, who you are. You want to be an American. You want to be, somebody else. But the rest of the world sees you as who you are.
Yeah.
So there's always that juggling of, who you were, who you want to become, and how the world sees you. And then, if you're fortunate enough at a very early age, you find the equilibrium. You find that. So because there's cultures and norms and religion and all that stuff that you want to maintain from your background, from your Ethiopianness. But there's also things that you have to adapt in order to get ahead, in order to, excel, in order to kind of assimilate with the new culture. So for me, that transition was not as difficult because, like I said, I was there at a very young age. I didn't know much, but for most people who actually, migrate somewhere else and who go somewhere else at an older age, there's always that issue.
Yeah. I just want to have this conversation, particularly because your experience in Ethiopia and the experience you had in the US actually is something that we aspire to have in life, but we don't get to have.
Clearly, you haven't been to my experience. You haven't seen my experience.
So, are you telling me it's not as?
No, it's just a different experience.
Yeah, right.
You're talking about life, school, work, all this experience.
Everything. For example, we can talk about the experiences you can have in the schools, and if you're someone who is into knowledge, the way you can acquire knowledge and how you can acquire it, and experiences with regard to friends that you can have, and all kind of access.
Yeah, the social fabric is different.
All right.
including the schools, the work environment, and everything. What's unique about that is, for me, what was unique was the amount of support you have at school. I mean, I went to St. Joseph when
In
I was a
Ethiopia.
kid.
All right.
It was very tough. It seemed like they were, sort of, teaching you so you can fail. It was just that hard. Over there in the U.S., the school system is, even the not so good schools, the mentality is to, provide you as much support as possible so that you can excel.
All right.
So that's a unique feature there. I mean, the work environment is, we have it here now more than ever, but it's more structured. It's more, it's more defined, right? It's very defined, meaning you have a set of KPIs that you have to deliver on day in and day out, and you're evaluated, you're judged on those merits, and those would be the experience you will take to another, and those would be your stepping stones, right? So it's very structured, and I think the earlier you get into this world, the work environment and stuff, I think you can adapt it easily.
One thing that bothers me about all these things, the education and the experience in life, the social situations that we have in Ethiopia and the one that we imagine the people in the other part of the world have, be it in the US or in Europe, is that you guys have it all. Like, for example, no, I don't have that belief now. I don't have that understanding. But if you ask a young guy, a young person in Ethiopia, and ask him about the experience in Ethiopia, and maybe ask him to imagine what it would be like to have that experience in different part of the world, especially in the developed world, in the US or be it England, for example. They would tell you about Ethiopia and they would give you a picture that everything is tough. But when they tell you about what is happening in the other part of the world, in the US or other countries like that, they would picture something out of
Better, yeah.
Not better. It's like Utopia or something like that. I don't think there is a word like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think what people are saying, my take on this is, what they're saying is not necessarily it's easier there.
Yeah.
Because it's not. Number one, for somebody like me, you have, I'm a minority. I'm a foreigner, first generation. So all these things will create, issues. It may not be discrimination. It may not, but even the selection process, in the work environment, getting ahead, there's a challenge. Number one. Number two, there's also, especially for people who move there a bit older, there's also the challenge of getting meaningful job. Maybe people don't want to go to school. So what they do is you have to work 3-4 jobs, to pay your bills. But I think what people are saying, if you ask me what, not just in Ethiopia, but you see all these immigrants, going from Africa to Italy, from Europe and all that stuff. I think it's light at the end of the tunnel. There is a clear understanding by many people that if you work hard, that then you can get somewhere, right? If you don't, discriminate between jobs, if you're okay with taking jobs because your purpose is, to get from this point to that point, there is, a process that you go through. There is a possibility that you can actually do that. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to be a rocket scientist, right? So you can do a lot of things. And if your objective is financial independence, then there is that possibility you can get. I think what people are lacking here, and when I say here, not just in Ethiopia, but generally in third world countries, is that optimism for tomorrow, right? And that's where, people, obviously if you're trying to move somewhere, you paint a very good picture because that's going to be your reality tomorrow. You can't just say, oh, you know what, that's a terrible place, but I still want to go. It just doesn't add up even in your mind. So you have to say, you know, it's better. At least I have an opportunity to do this. So I think that's where it is. And I'm not necessarily sure that, you know, people feel like that's a better world, but there is a better payout for hard work, right? That's my take.
All right. You just reminded me of a friend I had in high school, and whenever he refers to America or anything of America, he used to say, I don't know where he got this phrase or sentence. He used to say, the land of honey and milk, the land of opportunity, the land of everything.
Oh, it was sold. This is how it is. It's
you-
actually on a lot of documents, including your passport.
Yeah, I don't doubt that. That's fantastic. But as someone who have a direct experience, do you think that is true?
Well, I mean, I think this, you know, we come back to current affairs.
Yeah.
Right? You have, you know, a Republican administration in the White House. And you have somebody that, by all categories, maybe 50 years ago, 60 years ago, this guy would not be elected. Simply because of his temperament. But it's creating these leaders and these candidates, not just at the top level, but even at the local level, because of the failure of that promise.
Yeah.
The failure of that promise where it says, you know, if you work hard, play by the rules, then you get to a point. Not necessarily. It turned out, I mean, the capitalist system has actually left a lot of people behind. And it's made a very few people very, very prosperous. So, I mean, you know, if you ask me, you know, for me, education was important. I got that.
All right.
You know, of course, work experience was great. It's something I wanted. I got that. Right. For somebody that lives there and has been born and, you know, has a family, raising a family, etc. But maybe that dream is not really, and they want upward mobility. Maybe that's not coming through.
Right.
So it's really the fallout of the failure of this promise that's leading to a more radical, you know, leaders that say, you know, we have to break the system. We have to make it work, you know, for everybody else. I mean, I'm not saying this is the way to do it, but at least that's the justification.
All right.
And that's why people, I mean, if you look at who voted for you know, the current administration. Traditionally, you know, these guys would not have voted. These bunch of, you know, African Americans, minorities, women, Hispanics, Mexicans, you know, these are people who normally stay away from the Republican Party, let alone, you know, somebody like, you know, Mr. Trump. So it's really just a way of people revolting against the system, saying, look, we've gone through this process. Nothing is really impacting our life. Our life is not improving. Therefore, let's give this guy a chance.
All right. So are you saying capitalism in trouble or the Republican Party is in trouble?
I think both.
All right.
I mean, the Republican Party in trouble for a completely different reason.
All right.
But the system, the capitalist system, the failure of it is really indicative of, you know, the types of leaders that are coming out, the types of issues people are pushing, candidates and politicians and officials are pushing, and the temperament of the people. The constituent has changed.
All right.
You know, if you are against, you know, some sort of a social issue before, you stick with that, right? But now the economy is, you know, trumps everything else for everybody. So you vote against your social interest because you think the economy and your well-being is actually much better than the other issues. So it's obviously in trouble.
All right. Alex, obviously your life is fascinating. And part of the reason that I'm telling you this is because your experience in the U.S. is really I mean, it's not something that I would want myself to be involved in because there is a military part of it. I'm not really fond of having that experience, but
You're not up for waking up at 4:00 in the morning.
that's not my thing. That's not really my thing. But really, tell me about it. It's really fascinating.
I mean, I wanted to go to college and I didn't have the money, so I joined the military. Simple as that.
Really?
Simple as that. And my dad was a military man, so he was happy. So 2 birds in 1 stone.
All
you
right.
know, make family happy, get some cash for college. So it was as simple as that. I think undergrad, when people talk about going to undergrad, you don't really necessarily do it for you.
All right.
You do it because your family wants you to do it, and you haven't, you know, if you're young, you haven't really figured out what you want to do, and sometimes, you know, maybe the education part is not where you want to go. But for me, it was important, so I joined.
All right.
I joined the U.S. Military Reserve,
All right.
U.S. Army Reserve. The training was brutal. I mean, you can go to bed. You have to wake up at 4:00 in the morning every day,
All right.
at least during your training. It doesn't matter if you go to bed at 3:30. You still wake up at 4. And the reason sometimes you go to bed at 3:30 is because there's so many chores that you have to do as a team. So what it does is it builds a teamwork.
Wow.
Even if you don't like your teammates, even if you don't like, you know, the company you're in, you have to make sure everybody does their chores. If there's one person that has not finished, then until either you help this person to finish, bottom line, if this person is not done, nobody goes to sleep.
Wow.
So it was very rigorous, but the training was fantastic. It was, I think it teaches you a lot more about, you know, independence, a lot more about, you know, handling stress. It was a great experience.
Yeah, thinking about your military experience and the schools you went to, this actually reminds me of someone else, the vice president of the U.S. I think he had similar kind of experience. He had his time in
This guy?
military.
The current one or the-
the current one.
Oh, I know nothing about this guy.
Really?
I know absolutely nothing.
So no,
this
there is a lot of other similarities as
Really?
well, and the other similarity is about your involvement in politics, especially about campaigns and things of that nature.
That was fun. I mean, I was a volunteer.
All right.
I started out as a volunteer, and depending on your interest, these volunteer opportunities are there. It's not a flashy job. I mean, sometimes I started out, you know, help volunteering on John Kerry's campaign.
All right.
John Kerry was running for president at the time, and it's basically you go, they bus you or they fly you to a different state. They call them swing states.
All right.
I was in Ohio. Ohio is one of the swing states, and you just knock on doors and you try to convince people to go out and vote and at least get a sense of who they want to vote for, etc. Right? And you do this literally day in and day out.
All right.
Then, you know, maybe the second campaign I worked on, because you have a little bit of experience, then they can move. It's chaotic, by the way.
All right.
It's chaotic. It seems so organized and stuff, but it's not. And they'll say, hey, are you available? Yeah, I'm about to go knock on the door. No, don't do that. You know, come over here and do some sort of analysis of voter registration. Or it can be just simply data entry of new voters and et cetera. So, but it was great. I mean, for me, number one, it kind of ignited a passion about policy and, you know, the politics, how deals are made, how policies are made. Critical issues to people, to everybody. But it also led me to get my first job in politics.
All right.
And so these things count.
That's amazing. So would you say that all these experiences, like in the military and after that involving in the campaigns, different campaigns, would you say they impacted the decisions that you made after that? And
I mean, yeah. I mean, I've always wanted to work in the policy space.
All right.
Social policy, political policies, economic policies, and I did that. I did that for quite a while with various organizations. It kind of like I said, it kind of ignited this passion that, I could do this. And it was at the time, this was very much, everybody knew who was voting for the Democrats, everybody knew who was voting for the Republicans. So it was relatively easy, and meaning that there was no need to kind of splinter the issues, one issue 15, 20 different ways, because you have now, various constituents within a constituent group. It was simpler times in a lot of ways. But for me, it created that passion. It created that opportunity. Yeah, it did.
All right. Let's go to the schools that you went to. I have this experience. As this is a disclosure because you know about it. I went to university here in Ethiopia, so my experience of university is a bit brutal because the thing that you mentioned from the very outset, that the experience you had in school in Ethiopia and the one that you had in the US was different. People grew you, and they don't teach you for some kind of, results that would make your life easy, but rather make everything complicated. And that's the circumstance I was in.
Yeah.
So I had this imagination, if I had the chance to go to one of these countries, especially the US, and learn from a professor from there, I would squeeze everything I could from this individual and be as knowledgeable as they come, like wise, knowledgeable, and everything. So apparently you have this chance.
You're a closet professor. That's what it is.
Yeah.
You're in the wrong job, brother.
I don't know. I don't know.
But look, the opportunities are there. The educational environment obviously depends where you go, but the higher you go, the more supportive it is.
All right.
And you don't just learn from your professor, from your class. You learn from your classmates. It's really, it's a great environment. You have, events that are throughout the city, throughout the state that you can go in. Most of them are free, even if the ones that you have to pay, you can probably, get a letter from your university and get an exemption or some sort. So there's a lot of opportunities for you to learn. And that's always great for somebody who is, thirsty for knowledge. I think it's great. And I hear Europe is even better, particularly in the UK, because...
I'm not really sure about that. But in the UK, we can say more or less similar to the US experience, but in other part of the Europe, for example, the system in Germany, I hear is not. It's really strange.
But when you think about development,
all right,
right, there's always an anchor, an education anchor.
Definitely, yeah.
So if you're serious about growing as a country, if you're serious about developing, even as a company, then you have to invest in education. And that's partly what, a lot of these developed countries have done. You simply have to do it. You can't really, leapfrog the education component.
All right.
You can buy it, for a short period of time, but that's costly. You can import knowledge, you can, hire foreigners, you can bring in, skilled labor, etc. But that's not sustainable. So, countries that, if you rank in terms of development, if you do that, when you look at their education, particularly their higher education, because, lower education, the U.S. has one of the worst, lower education system anyway. But as you go, up into the education's ladder, then you see that commitment, you see that investment, and that's paying off because when you talk about somebody who's a successful businessman, who's running for office, who's managing this big corporations, they all came from a very short list of higher education institutions, right? Because this has been invested in that, and that's what we need to do.
Yeah.
As a continent.
All right. Alex, you've been modest about a lot of things, and this thing in particular is really different. You went to a university that one of the presidents that I know, I heard of and I saw, went to. Barack Obama went to Columbia, but you went to Columbia as well.
A lot of people went to Columbia too.
But you don't want to talk about that. I don't know why that is. Imagine me going to that kind of school, that kind of university, and I would blubber about it. I would tell everyone about it.
The way I got into it was actually through the back door, because I went to I was accepted to the new school. I wanted to do international development.
All right.
And that's it. Mm-hmm. Because that whole experience with policy, that whole experience. So, new school is in New York City, and it was very, it's one of the most liberal schools in the country. It's one of the oldest in the country. It's actually, even though the name was New School, it was actually started in 1909 or something.
All right.
So I got in there doing that.
Okay.
But then I did development and international relations.
Okay.
2 years into it, I'm thinking of moving back here. But what am I going to do? Mm-hmm. That education, international development, international studies and development, it's really not, something that you can get a job on. Mm-hmm. So I looked into what Columbia has to offer, and lucky for me, these two schools have a joint programs. Mm-hmm. So I did 2 years in Columbia, basically taking development economics and finance. So finance 1 through advanced, entry to advanced development economics, same thing. So my way is, through the back door. I'm not sure if I would have been accepted had I not been accepted to the new school. So
see my point of you being modest about things. All right. So you have really interesting parts about your life, about your experience, and I learned a lot through our friendship, and I really admire your courage and actually in different things.
Why I moved here?
No, not that part. That is one of the parts, one of the issues. Why did you come back to Ethiopia, though? I just want to know about that first.
I mean, everybody has. I didn't. I didn't want to come back, and I had no interest because I didn't have any immediate family here. So I felt there was no connection. Mm-hmm. But my friends, my college roommates, undergrad, they're all Ethiopian, so they moved back.
All right.
So I started coming here for vacation.
Okay.
And eventually, I said, this is someplace I can live in.
All right.
And it's also something that ignites once I've been away for 25 years when I started coming back, right? But when I did that, something that you've forgotten, gets rekindled, which is, identity, belonging. Yeah. These things, you've essentially said, what, I'm an American. I don't know the customs. I don't know the culture. I'm here, not consciously, but subconsciously. So what I found out before I moved, I used to come back at least twice, a year mm-hmm. here, even for a short period of time. Mm-hmm. So what I learned is, I said, there's a lot of things that I had forgotten that, and there's a lot of benefits to actually coming back to your country. I wanted to do, volunteer work. I wanted to start working here because I knew whatever job it was, I knew I can contribute. I can at least bring something to the table. So that kind of drove me, and eventually, in a few years, I packed and moved back. Mm-hmm. But not an easy road because you have to relearn a lot of things. Mm-hmm. You have to relearn, particularly. Not necessarily when you're employed. Because I was employed when I moved back. I had a job secured, so that's how I did it. And after a few years, I went back to private sector, my own business. But when you particularly get into your own business aspect, mm-hmm. there's a lot of unlearning to do.
All right.
That you bring from there, and it takes time. It takes time. It takes a great support. People who've, I was lucky because I had friends here who've gone through the system, who understand the Ethiopian context of the business and the investment environment. So I had a lot of mentors, and I had a lot of people that I can look up to and say, okay, this is how they did it. But it was not an easy road. But
All right.
13 years later, you stop complaining.
Amazing. You stop complaining. The resentment is there, but
No resentment. No, it's home sweet home.
home sweet home.
Home sweet
All
home.
right.
That's right.
All these things, the experiences that you got, and the education that you got from the U.S. and as a child, as a kid in Ethiopia, what kind of value do you think you brought to Ethiopia now? What are the things that you see in the country, in the education sector and the other areas that you are interested in? And what do you think can be done to ameliorate or to change what we have in the country?
Yeah, I think one of the things that you immediately recognize is, it's somebody said to me, when you move back to Ethiopia, it's like having a crystal ball that you can see the future.
All right.
Because Ethiopia's future has already happened somewhere else in the U.S., maybe 50 years ago, 40 years ago, 100 years ago in some cases. So you will immediately, exposed to a lot of opportunities.
Okay.
Right? So that even recognizing these opportunities, then hopefully you brought hard work. Hopefully you brought in, a little bit of, understanding, humility with you. Then I think that path for me, even though it was difficult, it was very rewarding.
All right.
In other words, the value system that I brought is, okay, I have to, I know how to work hard, because in the US, it's very competitive. It's very cutthroat. You bring that, but you tame it a little bit because of, all the cultural nuances. You have to tame it, but at least being driven, despite the challenges. It's always challenging over there. I never had a business in the US, but, especially when you go into your business, that tenacity, that determination, and that creativity also. I think one of the things that most people bring is the ability to see things from a different perspective. There are a lot of areas where, I had to butt heads with people, with partners, simply because the exposure was not there, and there was always one way of thinking. I think you bring that, and the way you sell it, the way you implement it is obviously matters, but at least you bring fresh perspective and things like that. So for me, it was challenging, but it was also rewarding.
All right. There are a lot of points that I want to mention.
Let's mention it.
Most importantly, the points that I want to discuss with you are related to what you are experienced in and your expertise. For example, let's talk about international relations and what the situation is looking like these days.
Globally.
You mentioned the part that Donald Trump came to power again, and a lot of things have been changed, and we're facing different situations around the globe because of his assumption of power again, and a lot of other things. And Africa is going through different process.
Yeah.
I know you wrote about Africa in different times, and we have challenges in different part of Africa. So, given the circumstances and the change that are happening in the world, do you think the coming times or the times to come, the future will be okay for Africa? Or what are the things that we need to engage in? Because in Africa, in the continent, the median age is around 19 or 19.7, which is we have more than 65 or 70% of our population in the young category of people. we have opportunities in that regard, but still we have other problems. For example, we were not able to train as many people as we want, as the economy wants. We were not able to have guarantee that quality education, as you've been mentioning earlier. So is the future bleak for Africa?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't think so. I mean, let's start with the global context, right?
All right.
What's happening in the U.S., I think, is an opportunity for Africa.
All right.
In other words, but Africa has to take advantage of it. A lot of the third world country has lived under the umbrella, whether it's security, economics, maybe not so much social, but security in economics, umbrella of the United States, right? That umbrella is now being lifted. I feel it's temporary anyway, because the U.S. government changes, their president every 4 years, and this guy cannot run. It will change, but at least for the next 4 years, that umbrella has been lifted, and it's sending shockwaves throughout Africa and other developing countries. The opportunity then is USAID is a classic example, right? What USAID, it's done tremendous work, but it's also tied a lot of African countries' hands, simply because it's providing aid, So I think the opportunity is, I think Africa has to work on policies.
All right.
Africa has to recognize that maybe this is an opportunity for the continent itself to work on, trade agreements. The African Union has been talking about, some sort of, continental free trade pact. The Europeans did that, and they started way after the African unions. We haven't gotten that. It costs more money to call Kenya than it does the US. It costs more money to ship goods to Nigeria than it does to China or the US or parts of Europe. So these structural problems have to be fixed. And I think now, if Africa looks inward, then, and obviously, work on the policies, work on really empowering private sector, because if you look at development, the only thing developed countries did as a nation, as a government, is really give the private sector enough room to actually do what they do best. They're protectionist, in fact. There's all this tariff conversation going back and forth, to a point where, this tariff conversation is happening between a US government and China, but it's actually referring to American companies because they're all there. So when you're talking about tariff, 100% tariff, of goods coming from China to the US, they're talking to Apple. They're talking, Nvidia or something. American companies that have, over the past 50 years, that have actually moved their production to other countries. But this all happened because the country got rich, right? And private sectors have been, policies have been really favorable, especially as corporations grow in the favorable policies. Take the 1%, pays a small amount in terms of taxes. So the point is, for Africa now, if you really work on favorable policies to unleash the private sector,
all right,
right? Because if you really recognize that you really have to stand on your own, not necessarily, be, somehow, have coverage, in economics and finance and with the World Banks and the IMFs and the likes. I think that's one. Policy is one. The other thing is, as part of that policy, then education has to be there. We're investing a lot of money on infrastructure. Yeah. Schools and education system needs to be one of it, because these are the kids that will build your nations tomorrow. There's also an opportunity for Africa, because a lot of the U.S. partnership with a lot of Africa is carrots and stick. You get this, but you have to do this. If that is lifted, then you're free to kind of trade and make new partners all over the world, because the BRICS got a lot of slack for talking about trading in their own currency.
Yeah.
I mean, why not? I mean, it's not easy, but why not? If you agree. So it also would open your opportunities to partner with, Asia and Latin America and even within Africa. So I look at it as an opportunity. Obviously, there's going to be hiccups. There has to be peace. So I think this is the way I see it.
All right. Alex, are you into sports? Basketball. Were you impacted by hip-hop culture? Maybe because...
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, but we are really fascinated about that conversation.
Hip-hop?
Yeah.
That's the next guest, I think.
No!
Okay.
The reason I am bringing this topic up is not because I want to talk about hip-hop and how it impacted your life or anything like that, but I just want to bring something up. Young people in Africa, young people in Ethiopia,
the soft
have
power. Yes.
the soft power aspect of it. We think of America, we think of the West in that lens.
Yeah.
So the imagination that kid has, the kid that I mentioned around the beginning of this conversation, came from not from the policies, understanding the policies, understanding the laws and the other things, but the soft power aspect of it, hip hop, the music, the films, the movies, and everything.
I mean, this was done deliberately.
All right.
Right? This was done deliberately. Henry Kissinger has a book called Diplomacy.
All right.
And he mentioned it there. When you try to export, look, imagine you're exporting a new, economic system.
All right.
Capitalism, because and also democracy, to a lot of countries that have nothing in common with the exporter, right? Socially, traditionally, culturally, language-wise, etc. When you do this, you have to somehow create an image that, despite all the structural challenges, you want to emulate that, right?
Yeah.
So the musics and the films and the culture were exported as part of that. So yeah, why not? I mean, I don't think it's practical for this country to be fully capitalist.
Yeah.
But why don't I give it a shot? Because look, they look very happy. So you know what I mean? So it was a deliberate, strategy that was done. And obviously, from a company standpoint, they want to make money and it's a global reach, but it's really part of that. And this is what you're referring to.
Yeah. How do you see the momentum of that going forward? I mean,
The soft power.
The soft power aspect.
You mentioned sports, so I'll tell you. I'll answer this in terms of basketball.
Yeah.
When the United States was playing in the Olympics, the early stages, the 80s and 90s. I mean, they were winning by 50 points, by 40 points, right? Fast forward to 2000, 2002, 2004, they're struggling to beat, other countries because their skill levels have developed. So the point is, there are other, exemplary countries that we can look into. Maybe they're not so good at exporting, who they are, etc. But in terms of, India has a very robust, film and music industry. Nigeria and all these guys have. So I think the dominance, the U.S. dominance, will be there simply because of the longevity. People have gotten used to that. I still can't watch subtitled movies, even if it's made in Hollywood or in the U.S. like on Netflix.
No.
But the point is that's changing. The competition is coming up. China. If you want to know about China, and you're here and I'm in the US, we come back with two different opinions about China.
Yeah.
I had a very different, bleak assessment of China when I was in the US because the US media discredits competition, discredits, rivals. When you're here, it's a completely different narrative that you hear because you also, number one, you also are exposed to the real China, as opposed to through a filtered, lens. So there are other countries stepping up, and I hope Ethiopia will be there at some point.
The way I see it is all these things are being practiced in other countries. For example, you mentioned basketball, and other countries are practicing it in the way they do because the U.S. sold it in the best way possible.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So does that show how powerful that country is, or how?
Well, I mean, how influential it is. Yeah, how influential it is. But remember, these things are also huge cash cow. So, on a bilateral level, the United States and China are not talking, are arch enemies. But, there's basketball relationships, there are other cultural, So, yes, even though the U.S. is exporting it, these other countries are taking it and really excelling at it and taking it to a different level. So the fact that, Olympics are being held in various parts of third world countries, that's indicative of not just, the U.S.'s push, for popularizing these sports, but the readiness of these other host countries as well. Because there was a time where, Olympics were done primarily in the West. Now we had it in South Africa, we had it in China. We're going to have it in Qatar, right?
Maybe
Qatar or something. So it just shows you that the rest of the world is catching up. So we'll have a lot of role models as countries. And I think as a country and as a continent, what we should aspire for is to be a role model ourselves. Maybe not in terms of, very sophisticated technology, but there's ways that we can be role models for certain things.
All right. So I had this discussion with a friend of mine about empires coming and empires falling. And we were talking about empires because of what is happening in the world today, and especially in the US. And this friend of mine has the idea that this empire is going to crumble anytime soon.
I think I know that friend.
So my argument was, given the soft power and the other things that the U.S. did for a very long time, we should expect the U.S. to be the superpower that it is today for the foreseeable future, maybe 40, 50, more than that years. So how do you assess that? Do we have that alternative, that option to think of as a countries, or as a country that can actually replicate or that can come up with a solution to the problem of the world, or create a problem and give a solution like most countries are doing?
I don't know. I think the obvious question is, if there is a new empire, do you want it to continue where the U.S. left off? Or do you want it to sort of restructure it, have a different type of, world order? I mean, the fact is, over the past, particularly after World War II, the international institutions, the world stability and security has really been written and underwritten by the strength of the United States. And for selfish reasons, And if you have that, expansionist ambition anyway, this would be what you would do.
All right.
However, is it going to crumble? I don't think it would do that in our lifetime, but it's entirely possible. Because if you look at a lot of empires in the past, none of them have been really defeated by a rival empire.
Okay.
Yes, the final blow may come through a war, but it really just kind of collapsed within because, number one, it became so vast and unsustainable to control and to regulate because, people's needs change, and that's what's happening in the U.S. I think there's a lot of frustration in the U.S. There's a lot of ideologically, it seems like you talk to somebody from California and somebody in Texas, it just seems like they're living in a totally different world, different countries, because of these, again, this is part politics, part intentionally, to kind of radicalize the left and the right for the purpose of winning elections, etc. But the underlining, the common denominator is also economics, right? Like we talked about earlier, right? A lot of people are now benefiting from the capitalist system. Education is expensive. Healthcare is not universal, and it's very expensive. And these are the basic things. So, is it possible? Yeah, I think it's possible. You need a unifier. You need to have concrete results, whether it's a Democrat or Republican or whatever comes into office. You need to recognize that there is a possibility of splintering, so that you can work on that. The social fabric has been disintegrated. Economics, like I said. So if you don't do that, if you don't bring it back, it's entirely possible. It's entirely possible.
I remember us having this conversation, myself and you, talking about American exceptionalism and discussing this point. And after that, I was reading books and deep diving into the history and the politics of America. And I found out that most people in the US don't know that they are powerful. Their country is powerful. Most people in the US, especially in the countrysides, you correct me if I'm wrong, they don't have any idea what the other world is doing and how the other world is maintaining life or existing as it is today. For example, my understanding and my actually belief is that people don't have any idea that Africa is not a country, but a continent. I mean, the irony, can you imagine living in that powerful nation and one individual fails to understand these nuances?
Yeah, I think this is the making of the formation of the country, the size of the country, the education, and the exposure. Europeans are very good. I did a study abroad in the UK, and I lived with a British family. Oh, they knew more about Ethiopia than I ever could.
Wow.
More, and they never set foot here.
Wow.
But their exposure is different. British. The UK, the British government was owned and colonized a lot of parts of the world.
Yeah.
So that history is there. That history is in the books. So that there is that history. So the formation of the country in the U.S. when you come back, it was really an Anglo-Saxon country that was formed, right? And then eventually the size of it, it doesn't really allow for most people to kind of venture outside unless you really want to try and do that. And then there's the education system as well, which is.
Why don't you teach your kids geography?
They do. The classes are there, but I don't know. They call baseball the World Series, and it's between New York and Boston. Do you know what I mean? So it's I don't know how to answer this, but there's a very closed. It's a very close society in terms of knowledge, exposure, right?
All right.
And there's also this, why do we need to know about the rest of the world kind of thing? So we're here, the rest of the world is here.
Because you're leading it.
So, that comes at the leadership level. But when you're talking about, Joe Sixpack, from Wichita, Kansas, this guy has no idea. So I think it's a combination of that. But historically also, I think the Europeans are a lot more, exposed to the rest of the world simply because they had a hand in most parts of the world, and that tradition, that culture, that history, has sort of shaped their education system, has shaped their exposure. Even now with the European Union, people travel within the Union, so that exposure in itself, lets you see, oh, wait a minute, there's completely different people that I need to learn about. It's not really the case in the U.S.
Okay, let's come back to Ethiopia. And we in Ethiopia have nostalgia about the music that we listened to as a kid, and the kind of food we ate growing up and all this kind of things. And do you have them?
Do I have those nostalgias? Not really.
Really?
I didn't have it when I came here.
All right.
When I moved back, I didn't really have it. I mean, I was a kid when I left.
Would you say that that's a similar experience to as a people that left Ethiopia as a kid and coming back to Ethiopia?
Possibly.
Really?
Yeah, I would imagine so. I mean, you just haven't, built enough memory, enough nostalgia. I think now if I move back
To the U.S.
to the U.S. or elsewhere outside of Ethiopia, then I'm sure you'll have that because I've been here now for almost 13 years.
I mean, you've been mentioning about a fabric, the texture that is making you, the society that you live in, and the people that you interact with.
Right.
Does that impact? Does that have some kind of negative impact in your experience of what Ethiopia is?
Ask me that question again.
For example, if you ask me about Ethiopia, I have a lot to tell you about my childhood, the music I listened to. For example, the music that my dad used to listen to or is listening to right today, he's not listening. He has some kind of religious thing. But the music that he used to listen to, and those are the type of music that I like today.
Do I have that kind of influence?
That kind of influence.
Not really. I mean, not really. I mean, I think. I mean, there's cultural exposure even when we were here. There were, including music, including plays, actually, theater and stuff. I remember going to a couple of, plays even when I was a kid with family. So there is that sporadic memories and stuff, but I don't have that. I don't have that. I didn't have that attachment moving back or even when I was there. But every time I come back here before I moved, then I will take back memories. And I would, and then that would be replaced by another one once I come back and go back. So it was kind of cyclical like that. Something really that I kind of brought in with me.
All right.
Yeah.
But I'm really jealous about one thing. Thinking about the economy of a country or the experience of the people that lives in some part of the world. I think of the Indians of today, and I think of them in relation to the people that they have in different part of the world, dispersed in different areas, parts of the world. For example, in big companies of the US, I see faces that looks like Indians. Indians are conquering different part of the world. And I wish sometimes, I don't tell it to anyone, I don't express this feeling I have of Ethiopia in some way being able to conquer some part of or some area in that way. The reason I'm telling you about this experience or this thing is because these people send a lot of money, a lot of remittance to their country and their economy, the original country.
Because of that.
Yeah. So, do you think we can have that kind of opportunity? I'm not saying that we should be focusing on a particular thing. For example, they're focusing on technology or ICT or those areas. Do we have that chance?
Look,
maybe a similar one?
So yeah, and the short answer is yes.
All right.
And these are always designs these are always planned.
All right.
The Indians didn't just land on this. The Indians worked on becoming the back end of these global companies.
All right.
They started out like that. But when they did that, there was infrastructure. If they didn't have internet, if they didn't have connectivity, that would not have been possible, right? If they didn't have the education, that would not have been possible. So, in other words, the credit goes to the Indian government because they, set this up so that they set up a very good education system. They invested in the infrastructure. They invested in technologies so that private sector can take advantage of this, right? And it's true across the board. China, now, China is in the hot waters with the U.S., but when China started, China became a global superpower because of manufacturing. Everything in the West was being manufactured in China to this day. Now it's gotten so expensive that even companies, even the Chinese now outsourcing it to Vietnam, outsourcing it to Laos, and outsourcing it to other countries because their labor force has become very expensive. Their production cost has gone up. Why? Because they've gotten rich. They've gotten rich as a result of these small policies that they did. And these small policies are manufacturing. They said, look, the world is manufacturing. We're not there to invest on hardcore technology.
All right.
Think about this. 50, 60, 70 years ago, they recognized that in order for us to catch up from technologically, it's going to take us a long time. But what we do have is skilled labor. If we don't have it, we can teach them. And what we can invest on is manufacturing, plants and textile. So the world can produce their goods and services in our country. And that's what they did. And this is a very, very clear policy position. In Africa, Mauritius is doing that in terms of, these skilled laborers, right? If you go in these fiscal years, as for some countries it's June, some countries it's December, you will not find any finance or accountants in Mauritius because they're all skilled, efficient, and they're all have jobs outside. They go work for 3 months, 4 months, and they come back. And so it's entirely possible, not just for Ethiopia, for any country. The question then is, what are your natural endowments? What do we have, right? What do we have in terms of what is that makes us competitive in other world from other countries? We have cheap energy.
All right.
It's still cheap. It's a bit more expensive now, but it's still cheap. We have labor. We have land, right? So which means agriculture, right? So if we really invest in the technical skills, if we build these infrastructures just in these 3 areas, then there's no reason why the world would come in. In fact, now would be a great time to do it. China's gotten expensive. Even if it's not expensive, there's trade war going on. So, this would be a great opportunity to take advantage of that. Invest in the infrastructure, invest in the technology, invest in the skills, and the business will come. So, a long way of saying, yes, Ethiopia can also do that.
Definitely. All right. There is always someone that makes you feel like there is that light at the end of the tunnel, and you want to believe that the world is better, the world is great because of some contribution they would have towards whatever endeavor that they are in. And you are one of those individuals for me. I'm not really saying this because I don't just want to make you feel some kind of way, but we have this friendship for the.
I paid him to say that.
We have this friendship for the last 7 or 8 years.
Yes, we do.
And I always enjoy having this kind of conversations with you, and I'm really proud to call you a friend.
I appreciate that.
Thank you so much for coming. And if there is anything you want to say at the end.
Nope, that's it. It's great to be here. I think this is a great platform. I think you can reach a lot of people through this. Thanks for having me. Thanks for making me the first guest.
All right. Thank you so much, Alex.
Thank you,
All
sir.
Right.